UFOs Part 3, Return of the Overkill. You're listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed, high atop the Edwards Plateau. And I think this is a show that a lot of you have been waiting for. UFOs Part 3, we once again have Marty in the studio with us. How's it going, man?
Welcome, buddy.
Snake Force back in the cube.
That's right. And the Watcher will be joining us shortly. He's not quite ready yet.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's what he says. So yeah, we're really glad to have Marty back. We're gonna. He's been deep diving into this topic, and he says we gave him too much time, and so now he has too many notes.
Yeah, we're going full nuts this time.
All right, full nuts and bolts.
Full nuts and bolts.
Right. All right, but before we get into that, let's go ahead and do space weather news. Barely in it. From spaceweather.com. Return of the red auroras. Yeah, see, they got the theme down too, right? Return of the. You know?
Yeah.
Last night, November 11th and 12th, rare red auroras returned to Finland. The red color was not visible with the naked eye, but large red streaks appeared in short exposures with our cameras, reports photographer Rayan Elizane. Just like last month when the same thing happened, the red hue appeared when the solar wind was slow and unusually dense. Oh, that's interesting. And they got another thing on here about finding Comet Atlas. Let's see. How to find Comet Atlas. If you know your way around the constellation Orion, you won't have trouble finding Comet Atlas, also labeled C/2020 M3. The comet is located to the right and slightly below the belt of Orion. That was on November 9th. Now the green comet is just above the belt. Comet Atlas is in a new location every night as it glides towards Orion's head. A key date is November 15th. Within hours of its closest approach to Earth, Comet Atlas will pass a fraction of a degree from the bright star Bellatrix, Orion's left shoulder. Deep exposures may show this star shining through the outskirts of Atlas's atmosphere.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that might be interesting. Note, you cannot see Comet Atlas with your unaided eye. At closest approach on November 14th, the comet will shine like an 8th magnitude star, which is 6 times too dim for naked eye visibility. It is, however, an easy target for backyard telescopes and off-the-shelf cameras.
All right.
You can get some shots of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's see. Current conditions. Solar wind speed is 415.8 kilometers per second. The density is 5.3 protons per cubic centimeter. Sunspot number right now is 24. So total spotless days in 2020 is down to 65%. And let's see.
There are 24 sunspots right now?
Yes.
Oh.
24.
Are they up on the 29th degree? Are they like a high?
The two that are facing us are down in the southern hemisphere of the sun.
Because I was just listening to the Giza power plant episodes, and I think it was Robert Vaughter was talking about how all the sunspots. You know how they start in the
they'll be in a band. Yeah,
upper or lower latitudes.
Yep.
I guess, and they all start right around just under 30 degrees.
Yeah, that looks right. They're just just down low.
And he was pointing out that Giza is also right there at like 29 degrees. And Jupiter's red spot is all on these 29 degrees.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was really cool.
Yeah, these would be down where Jupiter's red spot is. Down in that area.
Yeah.
On the
cool.
on the southern hemisphere.
Cool.
Yeah. And let's see. Neutron counts today is 9.7% plus, rated as high, above the space age average. And okay, so there's a new stat here that people have been asking for, the planetary K index. So KP right now equals 0, which is quiet. And the 24-hour max has been 2, which is also rated as quiet. So the KP is the K index or K factor. It has to do with the aurora and high energy particles and how they're generated during geomagnetic storms. Okay. So the idea is that how much of this, because I think that some people, there is some evidence that that certain psychic abilities may work better or worse during certain KP numbers. So I'll have to keep looking into that, but there's the stat. For right now, I don't understand it. We'll go through some of the data later. Space Weather News or spaceweather.com has a whole article on what it means, so we can go through that some other time. But you got the numbers. 0. That's the KP index right now.
I knew it.
Planetary K index is KP equals 0.
That was pretty obvious today that it was at 0.
It was pretty obvious. Yeah. All right. Watcher says he's here. Says sketchy audio.
Welcome, Watcher.
Yeah.
Don't say anything. I don't want any sketchy audio on this episode.
All right.
And send us a care package. Well, we were supposed to send you a care package.
That's right. Oh,
Says
yeah, that's
Ann,
right.
so.
Yeah. Yeah. She said we need to get you better equipment. So
we'll wait for the next launch, and we'll get those sent off to you.
right. All right. Marty, where are we going today?
All right. Well, in this episode, I want to try to bust some of the misconceptions that are commonly, you hear a lot of people make references to Nazi UFOs and their connection to the Foo Fighters and all during World War II. And so I'm going to try to make some points here. The things I want to try to illustrate is, one, contrary to popular belief, sightings of unknown craft began before World War II. Second, sightings were not limited to small fireballs. In fact, many were of large structured craft. 3, the strange encounters were also not limited to the European and Pacific theaters of war. 4, the Axis powers also encountered the strange objects and were just as perplexed as the Allies. And 5, both U.S. and military investigations and the secrecy surrounding them began long before Kenneth Arnold's sighting in 1947.
Okay.
So
I've heard that a lot of pilots would see these things during the war, and is it true that they were sort of encouraged to not really report it? Is that right?
Yeah, I'll give some specific quotes from some of the documents that have been obtained in the years since then.
Okay.
A lot of what I'm going to discuss in the first segment is taken from the book Strange Company: Military Encounters with UFOs in World War II by Keith Chester. The book provides a vast amount of referenced material concerning all the mysterious objects that were encountered during the war, which there were a variety of types. There were 3 specific types that were encountered repeatedly.
Okay.
This first segment is just going to be kind of an overview of the array of different type of encounters that occurred, some of which, again, began prior to World War II. This first one, in Sussex, England, on the evening of July 5th, 1932, 4 Royal Air Force Hawker Fury 1 biplanes were flying in a crisscross training exercise, and when they encountered a light that shone directly down onto the center of their formation from high altitude. Experiencing mechanical trouble, 2 of the Hawkers were unable to remain in the formation and separated from the group. Captain Nigel Tompkins and Lieutenant Bruce H. Thompson were forced to make an emergency landing when both of their plane's engines quit. On their way down, Thomas passed so close to the intense light that it caused burns to his face and hands.
Wow.
1932.
Man.
Okay.
Those guys were in England?
Yes.
Is that what you said? Okay.
This next one was on December 31st, 1933. 4 Swedish flying corps issued orders. The fourth Swiss Flying Corps issued orders instructing their Army aviators to chase unknown aircraft in an attempt to discover where the intruders were flying out of, believed to be a mountain base. 2 Swedish airplanes carried out the aerial reconnaissance. Their attempts failed. Both planes were lost in the search, but fortunately the crews did survive. On Christmas Day, a second effort was initiated by Lieutenant Wanberg, who conducted a lone scouting expedition on foot and never returned. In an attempt to locate him, 3 skiers embarked on a rescue mission, and they too disappeared.
Whoa. That's a little creepy.
Yep. You're going to, as we go through these, you're going to start hearing these things like, wow, that sounds familiar. You know,
Yeah.
A lot of these have been recurring themes for quite some time. On February 3rd, 1934, the New York Times reported continued night flights over northern Finland, Sweden, and Norway by so-called ghost aviators, which have caused so much apprehension here as to prompt the general staff to organize reconnoitering of a wide scale by Army airplanes all over northern Finland, and remains a deep mystery. Mm-hmm. In Oslo, Norway, a very unusual sighting was reported on April 1st, 1934. In the newspaper, the Tidens Tengen, according to the story, 5 witnesses observed a very large airplane over Standorgen. One witness, a 16-year-old boy, said he saw a machine in the brilliant moonlight. The object had 8 propellers. As the airplane descended, it did not land, but began to move in wide circles over the water. From his vantage point, the boy was able to clearly observe the object, noting that it had cabin windows and they were all alit. Which in 1934, there wouldn't have been any large aircraft with cabin windows.
And with that many engines, was that a thing back then?
That was biplane period, so.
Yeah.
There may have been, but flying at low altitude and circling over the water would be unusual.
Is this like similar to the ghost rocket stuff that was happening in that area?
Yeah, that way actually the ghost rocket stuff happened right after World War II. That was more like 46.
All right.
We'll get to those further down the list.
Okay.
These are all pre-war here, or at least the United States.
It's interesting though because it like follows this pattern that I've noticed, and in some cases it doesn't always follow this pattern. But there's this interesting thing that a lot of times the sightings seem to be of tech that's like just a little bit ahead of where we are. Maybe 40 years ahead, maybe 50 years ahead, maybe less. I don't know. But it's interesting because he's seeing a plane that you would say, okay, yeah, that was something that you would see in the 50s, right, or the 40s.
That's why there's the idea that it's like secret government tech, because their tech is actually always leaps and bounds ahead of
what we know about. Yeah.
Well, like I said, you gave me too much time. So I actually had an entire segment dedicated to that specific question and has some theories. I have some theories as to why we're seeing this.
Well, I would also like to add that there's a parallel in the crop circle phenomenon because, they start out fairly simple, and then when people start saying, "Oh, well, you can make them like this," then they get more and more complex, and they happen quicker and fast. It's just
that's true.
I don't want to give away any spoilers. If we do a part 4, we'll get into that.
All right, cool.
I don't want to. I have a lot of information, so I don't want to get off topic too much.
This is the tangent cue.
Yeah.
All right. No, fine. You've got your thing. Let's go.
All right. In 1935, a mystery plane overflights, over Palestine, Texas. Witnesses were amazed to see a bright shaft of light suspended vertically to the ground, and it remained motionless high in the evening sky. Also in the U.S., Howard S. Baer was bringing in the new year in 1937, spending some time in the air, flying to North Carolina in his Curtiss Wright. Around noon over Virginia, he had no trouble identifying the shape of an aircraft about 1,000 feet below him, moving across his flight path. He watched as the 30 to 40-foot object passed by, noting that there were no signs of windows or propellers. He said it looked like a gondola, gunmetal in color, and both of the ends were turned up. Sounds like a canoe.
Yeah, that's weird. Wow.
Okay.
Both the ends were turned up.
What is that noise?
My laptop. It's got an update. Okay. In Norway on February 11th, 1937, the crew of a fishing vessel named the Fran spotted something in the night sky while departing Kavlesk. Around 9 p.m., they noticed a large airplane with red and green glowing lights resting atop the water. The Fran's captain turned his boat around to offer his assistance, but as he approached, almost immediately the plane's lights were extinguished in a cloak within a cloud of smoke before vanishing. Cloud of smoke. That's a recurring theme.
Yeah.
By the end of 1937, witnesses near the German-Polish border described objects in the sky resembling swords and coffins, reminiscent of those observed in North and South America years prior.
Flying coffins.
Seems like we've seen depictions of that in more historical paintings.
And swords, that's right. Crosses.
In the summer of 1938, over Somerville, Massachusetts, resident Malcolm B. Perry was walking home under the visible moon just after midnight. For close to a minute, he saw far above him a silvery object which passed silently. It was the size of a 12-inch ruler at arm's length, having no cabin windows below or propellers attached to the object. Perry was able to determine that the silvery object was slimmer than a conventional blimp, and it had tapered ends coming to sharp points. There were 4 rectangular portholes on the side that emitted an orange hue from within. But curiously, there were silhouettes of people looking down at him. Again, another recurring theme.
Yeah. Yep. So he thought it was it looked like a blimp, but it was pointed, but it didn't have a balloon. Is that the idea?
It was silver, it was slimmer than a conventional balloon and tapered on the ends.
Okay.
And it had 4 rectangular portholes on the sides.
Yeah. So, because like a blimp would have a huge thing above the cabin, the gondola or whatever it's called, right?
Right. And I may be like projecting on this, but if you look at the typical cigar-shaped UFOs that are reported, they're very often reported to have these lights along the side.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Is like
So,
a blimp in the big balloon part is not going to have windows with people
right.
in it.
And it would have a gondola hanging below.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay. December 22nd, 1941, in Ithaca, New York, resident George Boger, an electrical engineer, stopped his car to watch a round, sharply outlined object speed silently across the sky. The sun reflected off its bright aluminum or chrome finish. Boger estimated that the disc-shaped object had a diameter of 100 feet, flew no more than 400 feet off the ground at around 300 miles an hour, and made no sound.
That's really strange. Something flying that fast, making no sound.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, typically you'd think no engines or perfectly quiet engines, but just an object moving through the air at that speed
fast,
is going to make a lot of noise.
Yeah.
You're going to see these sightings are going to escalate. They're going to get weirder as we go down the list, but there will be consistencies, and the lack of sound is definitely one of them.
Yeah, like they're not displacing the air.
Correct.
Somehow.
Yeah.
The Dutch cruiser Tromp was sailing in the Tremor Sea, which is part of the Indian Ocean, when the crewmen were puzzled by a large illuminated disc approaching at terrific speed. For almost 4 hours, they watched in amazement as this wingless object circled above the ship. Finally, the disc departed the area at an estimated 3,500 miles an hour. Oof. No idea how they made that estimation.
Yeah.
It's difficult not knowing how close it is to you to be able to determine the size and the speed.
Exactly.
Over Evanston, Illinois, Reverend Robert H. Moore and 6 others attending the Seabury Western Theological Seminary witnessed a sharply defined rectangle about 3 times longer than it was wide. Color was a light gray, much lighter and brighter than the evening sky. No perceptible shading indicated a flat surface rather than a cylindrical shape viewed at 90 degrees to the axis. No apparent motion for about 10 minutes.
So it just floated there?
Yeah, rectangle, which is kind of
Flying
odd.
doors.
Yeah, flying doors. Yeah. So now we get to what is arguably the first major UFO event of the 20th century.
Okay.
And it's one that you hear kind of, you hear a lot of excuses for, misidentifications that caused it. But when you actually read the details and what the people involved say, kind of changes your view of it a little bit. And this was the infamous Battle of Los Angeles.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
On February 24th, 1942, around 1900 hours, alarms sounded in the Los Angeles area. A high number of flares and blinking lights were observed near the defense plants. A few hours later at 1:44, radar units again picked up an unidentified aerial target. At 2 a.m., Lieutenant Keith R. Martin and the 4th Intercept Command confirmed a well-tracked target. At 2:21, the unidentified target came within miles of the coast, so the regional controller issued a blackout. A few minutes later, at 2:43, anti-aircraft batteries in the vicinity saw something in the sky. Responding with gunfire, they sparked a chain reaction, and the night erupted into a frenzy of pyrotechnics. Many eyewitnesses said that they saw something else flying in the area. A triangular grouping of glowing lights was heading inland over the coast, near the defense factory areas. Air Raid Warden Raymond Angier, an employee of the Douglas Aircraft Company, witnessed the unidentified aircraft approaching Los Angeles. Quote, "I saw what had triggered the alarm, a formation of 6 to 9 luminous white dots in a triangular formation visible in the northwest," unquote. Running back inside and up onto the roof of his home, Angier got a better look. The formation of luminous white dots was flying in a triangular formation, moving very slowly at about 20,000 feet. Returning to the street, he saw the triangle of lights were almost at zenith, possibly slightly higher. Angier heard sporadic anti-aircraft fire, and between bursts, he heard no sound from the objects. Another witness, Paul T. Collins, saw bright red spots of light moving in a strange manner. The light's altitude was approximately 10,000 feet and had appeared out of nowhere, zigzagging from side to side. Collins watched guns of the anti-aircraft batteries near the Douglas Aircraft Company, also his place of employment, fire at the red objects. Taking into account our distance from Long Beach, Collins said, the extensive pattern of firing from widely separated anti-aircraft batteries, the movement of the unidentified red objects among and around the bursting shells in wide orbits, we estimated the top speed conservatively at 5 miles per second. In southwest Los Angeles, Lieutenant Miles reported seeing 3 planes flying at 9,000 feet in a V formation, even though his radar showed nothing on the screen. Sergeant Bowman, also with a 214th, saw 5 planes flying in a wedge formation that changed to a T formation. Lieutenant Anderson, with a 78th Coastal Artillery Station at the Douglas Aircraft Factory in Long Beach, saw a single aircraft in his field glasses and confirmed on radar flying at 20,000 feet. On February 25th, Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox declared the raid nothing more than a false alarm, but Army authorities disagreed. After waiting a day to get the facts straight, Secretary of War Harry L. Stimson announced to the War Department, indicating that possibly 15 enemy-operated unidentified planes were involved. Stimson determined that there were 2 possibilities. The aircraft were either Japanese planes launched from a submarine sitting offshore or commercial planes flown by the enemy from secret fields in California or Mexico. Stimson based his findings on information in the reports received from the Army Chief of Staff, General C. Marshall, who received details from military commands on the West Coast.
Is that a thing? Launching aircraft from submarines?
Yeah, no,
Never heard of that.
I think they're reaching there.
Yeah.
But I mean, seems like a good idea.
Did
Put some planes in a sub and cruise them in.
did planes have the ability at that time to fly at 20,000 feet? Don't you have to?
Yes, they did.
They did? Okay.
They
'cause
did, but
you got to be pressurized to do that.
yeah, and there were submarines that carried seaplanes on them, but they would carry one.
One seaplane.
Yeah, these were consistently, and I'm only giving a sample of what's in the book, but consistently these were of aircraft in a triangular formation.
Yeah.
So these, I mean, it seems unlikely that they would all be imagining the same thing.
Right.
They were probably seeing a formation, and
One guy
granted-
said it were red lights. Somebody else said that they were bright white. But other than that, they were seeing basically a triangular formation of multiple craft moving at altitude.
Well, if you notice, most of the descriptions, the altitudes were pretty consistent. So, and one of them did track it on at least one of the objects on radar.
Yeah. And Watchers put up some of the more famous newspaper photos of the.
And here it says, Marshall immediately sent out a report to President Roosevelt. The following is the information we have from headquarters at this moment regarding the air alarm over Los Angeles of yesterday morning. The details at this hour: 1. Unidentified planes other than American Army or Navy planes were probably over Los Angeles, and they were fired on by elements of the 37th CA barrage between 3:12 and 4:15 a.m. These units expended 1,430 rounds of ammunition.
Yeah.
As many as 15 planes may have been involved, flying at various speeds from what is officially reported as being very slow to as much as 200 miles an hour, and at elevations from 9,000 to 18,000 feet.
Yeah. And didn't they even with all those rounds and how slow they were moving, they didn't hit one of them? They didn't knock any of them down? That's the weird part, right? Didn't they move off after this?
Yeah, they kept going, but you'll see.
There were I also remember reading that there were some people. There was so much anti-aircraft shells in the air that people in the city got wounded.
Brained on.
There were, I believe there were.
Yeah, it was stuff
fatalities as a result.
Yeah, there were fatalities because
Yes.
these anti-aircraft shells were raining down on the populace.
But they blamed it on war nerves.
War nerves.
Yeah. So, about that time, overseas, on June 25th, 1942, a group of RAF Wellington bombers were headed south on a mission. While over Holland, First Flight Lieutenant Roman Sabrinsky, piloting one of the bombers, heard over his headset the rear gunner informing him that an aircraft was approaching from the rear. Unable to determine the exact distance, Sabrinsky saw a very bright light heading towards his aircraft. The object was the size of the moon, possibly a little bigger, and was visible high in the sky. Sabrinsky was able to discern that the object's true color, since it was well within firing range, was not white but a shining copper, sort of dull like the setting sun, but not very intense. Approaching dangerously close to his aircraft, the object was approximately 200 yards away. "Give him a blast," Sabrinsky ordered. The rear gunner, blazing away with all 4 machine guns, sent a hail of lead and tracer rounds towards the intruder. The tracer rounds, used to direct line of fire to the object, were hitting their mark. To the crew's surprise, the rounds were simply entering the object and not coming out the other side. The bullets were either falling towards the ground or passing through the object. They simply were not passing through the object. They simply entered the ball of light and disappeared. Remarkably, with so many apparent hits, the crew could see no visible damage whatsoever. The shiny object suddenly changed position and at a terrific speed moved over the port side, almost at the same distance of about 200 yards from the wing. Both the rear gunner and front gunner blasted away. Seeing the tracers entering the target from 2 angles, Sabrinsky was now sure that the object was around 200 yards away from his aircraft, receiving the full firepower from 2 machine guns. Sabrinsky recalled, quote, "I moved over my seat in the cockpit and took the controls over myself. I did an evasive action. While I was doing quite violent maneuvers, moving the wings up and down, this thing stayed exactly at the extension of my wing. No matter what Sergeant or Lieutenant Sabrinsky tried, the object was there like a shadow. Pulling out all his evasive maneuvers, the machine gunners resumed their assault. A moment later, the object moved to the front of the aircraft, stayed in that position for a period, and then moving in an upward direction, quote, it took off at fantastic speed, at least a 45-degree angle, and disappeared between the stars." Minutes after the encounter, another Wellington bomber crew traveling not far behind Sabrinsky encountered the same phenomenon. So that sort of parallels the LA sighting. In other words,
Yeah.
the anti-aircraft guns weren't having an effect.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so the Watcher's got a couple good points here. One, he says, I think he's right. The seaplanes probably can't fly at 18,000 feet, right? Can a pontoon plane fly that high? I don't know.
Not.
Yeah. And he also says there were casualties. The Battle of Los Angeles claimed 6 lives. 3 civilians were killed directly by friendly fire, while 3 others suffered heart attacks during the hour-long siege. And a number of buildings were also damaged by their own anti-aircraft guns. So they shot all this ammunition at him and did no damage. Same with that plane. It opened up every gun it had. And that was interesting that the pilot was now with the front and rear gunner going with the angles. He could make a better estimate on how big it was and how far away it was from his plane.
Oh, that's cool.
On the morning of August 5th, 1942, an aircraft approached the USS Helm. Considered an enemy aircraft, a full alert was sounded, and there was no chance of it striking first. The aircraft, as the aircraft approached, 3 cruisers and 7 destroyers executed a preemptive strike, a full-fledged Navy welcome. Through the dense wall of lead, the aircraft continued unscathed, getting closer to the helm. The aircraft reached within 3,000 yards. It executed a sharp turn and increased in speed and proceeded to circle the entire fleet. The witness who was assigned security detail observed the craft through a pair of 750 power field binoculars, noting that it did not appear to be any kind of known U.S. or Japanese aircraft. It was approximately 90 feet in diameter, looked something like a silver-colored cigar-shaped object. At times, the aircraft had a oval or flat shape to it with a round dome on top. Both the captain and the executive officer had a good look. They confirmed it had the appearance of a streamlined cigar. According to one witness, the directional control released all guns and said for the gun captains to go local controls. Although the director could keep up with him, they weren't able to take enough of a lead out on the machine to allow it to swing far enough ahead to hit him. The direct control the direct controller insisted the object had reached speeds of 10,000 miles per hour.
Whoa.
Wow.
The
And
direct
he was calculating that by how fast
how
he had to
fast
swing
the
gun.
turrets could turn, exactly. They could not swing the turrets fast enough to get the
To get a
guns
lead
to
on
lead
it.
us.
The guys over there like,
All right, this is great. We got to take a break, though.
okay.
Already done with the first segment. It's fantastic.
All right.
Back with more UFOs after this. Snacks!
And we are back, Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Just cracked open some Brewmaster beers, sharing them around the cube here
All
with
right,
Marty.
Cheers, gentlemen.
bud.
Cheers.
All right.
Aha. And of course, we have the UFO researcher extraordinaire, thrice removed.
That's right.
So we're going to start this segment off with a really odd one. This happened in the summer of 1942. In the Pacific near the island of Tasmania, Major Brennan of the Australian Royal Air Force and his crew spotted an object in the clouds. At 5:50 p.m., this is a quote, at 5:50 p.m. we were flying some miles east of the Tasmanian Peninsula when all of a sudden there came out of the cloud bank a singular airfoil of glistening bronze in color. The major recalled, quote, I say it was around 150 feet long and around 50 feet in diameter. On its upper surface was a dome or cupola from which it seemed to be reflecting flashes as if the sun struck something which might or might not have been a helmet worn by something inside. On the other end of the airfoil, it thinned out to sort of a fin. Every now and again, there came from its keel a greenish-blue flash. It turned at a small angle towards us, and all of a sudden, I was amazed to see framed in a white circle on the front of the dome the image of a grinning Cheshire cat.
What?
It went off at a hell of a pace and dived straight down into the Pacific and went under, throwing up a regular whirlpool of waves, just as if it had been a submarine.
Whoa.
See, that sounds like, World War II. Like what's that plane? The Warthog. They used to paint the face on the front of the Warthog.
I was gonna say that too. It sounds like the grinning cat could be a painted thing on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have.
I'm pretty sure it's the Warthog. Look up that plane, Watcher.
A misidentification if it were not for the fact
diving
that it dove
into the water.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying.
It's kind of odd.
I'm going on the theme here of advanced military stuff. I'm not stereotyping you. I'm just saying. They did paint.
Yeah, they would paint
mean
shark faces
on the front of these. Yeah, and that one I think was a tank. It was designed to take out tanks. It was like highly maneuverable. It could do these dives and.
In mid-August 1942, German infantry in the Tula region of Moscow were going through their tasks. Then, according to one infantryman, I saw the most baffling object of my life. Out of a cloud appeared suddenly a huge cigar-shaped object, something like a zeppelin, but much bulkier and rounder at the front. The size was tremendous, approximately 300 yards long and 100 yards high at its thickest part. He could see no markings, and it was an aluminum-hued color and was very smooth-looking. Moving out of the clouds, the object's snout pointed downward, remaining stationary for at least a minute, giving the infantrymen time to see that there were no visible windows or signs of a gondola. The object leveled out and then turned its nose upward in slow and direct motions. In contrast to the surprising outburst of energy when it suddenly began climbing at terrific speed, disappearing within seconds and leaving no vapor trail. The witnesses were especially amazed at hearing no sound when the object shot upward out of sight. The German soldiers thought it was some kind of new Russian secret weapon.
Yeah, what did you say? 300 yards by 100 yards? That's really big to go that fast.
It's funny how that 300 yards number seems to be used a lot. And I don't know if that's
football fields.
Right. Is it a perceptional thing?
Well, I mean, a lot of people that shoot guns recognize things in like 100, 200, 300, 400 yards.
Right.
Because that's a common distance that you're used to looking at when you're shooting rifles.
Yeah, I guess you hear a lot of references to it was as big as a football field. And this one, 3 football fields. You know, it's weird how that's
3 football fields long and a football
we're more like it was bigger than a pyramid, or it's like it was like 15 T-Rexes. 2 things I've never seen.
Yeah, I don't know. It's. I mean, it is interesting how they would, they think it's a secret weapon from the enemy guy. But something that big moving that fast. I mean, what did he say at the end there? It went upwards and disappeared.
Right. They described that it tilted its nose down initially, and then it tilted its nose up and shot upward.
Yeah.
Which again, that wouldn't, you wouldn't
Blimps
imagine
can't do
doing
that.
a Zeppelin doing something like that.
Yeah.
A British Special Air Service operative learned that unknown craft were caught many times on film during the making of propaganda films. The footage was cut from the film's final editing, but remained in the original negatives. The operative watched the films as they were and described that they were clear. He said you could perfectly see the movements of the objects beside the bomber formations. In fact, the footage was so amazing that the operative was repeatedly startled each time the aircraft appeared on screen. He was unable to obtain copies of the film, but the operative managed to convince the United Nations News to give him a few copies of photographs, which he still has in his possession. And again, this book is heavily every one of these has the references. This guy goes into a lot of detail.
So this is all coming from the book that you referenced at the beginning?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to be moving into. There are so many of these. We could probably be here for hours just going through all of these. But I'm working towards something, and I'll move into maybe some of the more detailed ones here. RAF squadron leader Brian Froh and his crew were returning from a bombing mission in southern France. Ronald Claridge was operating the Lancaster bomber's radar set, monitoring the screen for approaching German night fighters. Suddenly, a malfunction of some type occurred, which caused his radar unit to stop working. Claridge quickly reported the problem to the pilot, who interrupted him, just yelling, "What the hell was that?" Trying to see what was causing Frau so much concern, Claridge climbed into the Astrodome. Now he too saw the amazing sight. Sitting off the starboard side of it was a string of lights. Cambridge stared at the spectacle. The lights were circular, rather like portholes of a ship. The color was very bright yellow, changing to intense white. I estimated that they were about 1,000 yards from the airplane. The ones nearest our Lancaster were the largest and brightest. They stretched fore and aft to what seemed like infinity. After about 30 seconds, I could see part of the enormous disc. Stunned, the gunners held their fire, and no order was given to fire upon them. The disc hung motionless for about 3 minutes and then suddenly shot ahead and was gone. They heard no noise from the engines.
So the lights they looked like they went off into infinity, but it was like lights on the rim. Is that what they're describing, sort of?
I guess. Said it was
Like
an
the disc
enormous disc.
Yeah, the disc was so huge that, wow.
According to witness A.W. Shawansky, quote, it was the summer of 1944 in Italy. During an offensive action in Lortero, at 10:30 a.m. in an almost cloudless sky, there suddenly appeared an egg-shaped, metallically glistening, motionless object. Our anti-aircraft guns immediately opened a barrage of fire. The shells burst below the object, and after a while our battery stopped when we realized the German batteries were shelling at the same object.
They're both shooting it.
Wow.
In late September 1944, Lance Corporal Carlson York with the 1st Canadian Army was just outside the city when he saw a glowing globe traveling in the direction of the front line in Antwerp. It seemed to be 3 or 4 feet in diameter and looked as though it was made of cloudy glass with a light inside. Quote, it gave a soft white glow. Its altitude was about 40 feet, speed about 30 miles an hour. There was no sound of any sort. He noted that the object, 40 feet off the ground, traveling at 30 miles an hour.
A 300-foot diameter globe.
No, it was 40 foot.
Oh, 40 foot.
feet.
Yeah,
40-foot diameter, 30 feet off the
Oh
ground.
no, I'm sorry. It was 3 feet, 3 to 4 feet in diameter,
Okay.
40 feet off the ground, traveling at about 30 miles an hour.
All right.
Made no sound of any sort. He noted the object was simply drifting in the wind, but obviously powered and controlled. Immediately it had gone beyond view and followed by immediately after it had gone beyond view, it was followed by another, which in turn was followed by 5 in all.
Wow.
Now, is that more like a Foo Fighter?
Right, that's actually where we're going. I'm sort
Okay.
of, there's a little bit of a theme to this thing. They're sort of evolving as we go through.
Yeah, okay.
On the evening of November 24th, 1944, Army Air Captain William Leet was flying over northern Italy near Trieste. Seconds later, Leet noticed a blinding light and felt an unbearable heat. It had gone so quickly it was gone as quickly as it came. Assuming it was a powerful searchlight crossing their path, he wondered why the Nazis had failed to notice the aircraft and blast them out of the sky. Then seconds later, a round amber light sitting off his left wing caught his attention. The object's outline was a perfect circle, too perfect. The color was a luminous orange-yellow, too luminous. The upper left waist ball gunner anxiously prepared to fire at the strange object, but Leet ordered him not to shoot. Not knowing what the object was, he told his men to keep it under surveillance. The object was not hostile and made no attempt to attack. It appeared to be close to our wingtip, though perhaps 100 yards laterally and 5 yards to the rear. Sergeant Harris, the upper gunner, got a perfect view of the object. Captain Leet asked him to describe what he was seeing. He goes, I don't know how to describe it. It's not an airplane or anything I've seen before. It was so perfectly round, I can't believe it. I guess it was about 10 feet in diameter and 75 to 100 feet from us. The rest of the crew concurred that the object was about 100 yards away from their B-17. Watching the entire time, the tail gunner asked Leet if he knew what it was. He goes, I wish I knew, Leet said. It hasn't bothered us, so we don't want to shoot at it. We wouldn't feel right about shooting an unknown object that seems to be from another world.
Wow.
That's cool.
It's interesting to me, too, that, they're like, well, it's not attacking. But I'm like, how do you know that? I mean, if it's already anomalous, how do you know if it's attacking you or not? I mean,
Right. You have to assume it's, at wartime, you have to assume it's hostile first.
yeah. And I think he was saying, okay, I don't know, the way that read, it sounded to me like it's not making any moves to attack us, but he's thinking in conventional ways. But a luminous ball that's made of some super high-tech thing could be killing you while sitting over there, and you would never know it. Obviously it didn't, but you know what I'm saying? Right. Just interesting. But of course, these guys they're on a mission, and they're set, and what they're looking for is conventional attacks against them. So a floating sphere that isn't shooting at you is not attacking you, but it could have been.
The 415th Night Fighter Squadron was probably one of the squadrons that encountered them most often. There are many, many reports from them, from different pilots. And it's also interesting that that's where the term came from. Let me read this. It says, the men of the 415th Night Fighter Squadron did not care what anyone at headquarters or above thought. They knew that they were an excellent unit of top-notch airmen and had nothing to prove. During a conversation, one of the pilots suggested naming the strange lights. Nearby, pilot and operations officer Charlie Horn chimed in on the conversation, suggesting they should call them Foo Fighters, a name gleaned from some of the men's favorite comic strips, Smokey Stover. Huh. The cartoon followed the escapades of Smokey Stover, a madcap fireman who named his fire truck the Foo-mobile. It was often stated in the comic, where there's foo, there's fire.
I didn't know that's where the name came from. That's cool. But yeah, I wonder if there's probably no way to do this, but it'd be interesting to find out, for example, if there was a higher incidence of like cancer in these guys that encountered these things. You know what I mean? If they were in any way radioactive, you know what I'm saying? Like it could have been dangerous.
Yeah.
And just so like there's probably no way to figure this out.
They were shooting neutrons at them.
Yeah.
They didn't know.
Right.
There are so many reports I have in here. I don't want to bore everybody to death with because there are so many of them.
It's not boring.
The only reason I'm trying to go through some of them is that there are consistencies that I kind of want to point out in this. And it leads into the next segment because as we get further into this, we'll get into the discussion of how many people believed, including at the time, they believed that they were some type of German superweapon. But
except those guys thought it was from another world. That was interesting.
right.
So was it the higher ups that thought that, or
well,
we'll get into it?
we'll get into
All right.
it. Right.
He's got this big
The
old
thing
grin
is,
on his face.
everybody
Every time we ask
was,
you a question, you're like, grin.
you're trying not to get ahead of me here. Yeah, everybody seemed to think it was the other guy.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
On January 2nd, 1945, multiple newspapers carried a story, not mentioning who wrote the article, but and which unit was interviewed. The New York Times was among the first major statewide newspaper to carry a story, quote, "Balls of fire stalk U.S. fighters in night assaults over Germany." It read, American night fighter base, France, January 1st. Germans have thrown something new into the night skies over Germany. The weird, mysterious Foo Fighter balls of fire that race alongside the wings of American Beaufighters flying in intruder missions over the Reich. American pilots have encountered these eerie Foo Fighters for more than a month in the on their night flights. No one apparently knows exactly what these sky weapons are. The balls of fire appear suddenly and accompany the planes for miles. They appear to be radio-controlled from the ground and keep up with our planes flying 300 miles an hour. Official intelligence reports reveal there are three kinds of lights we call Foo Fighters. Lieutenant Donald Mears of Chicago said, "One is red balls of fire which appear off the wings and fly along with us. The second is a vertical row of three balls of fire which fly in front of us, and the third is a group of 15 lights which appear off in the distance, like a Christmas tree lit up in the air, and which flicker on and off. The pilots of this night fighter squadron, in operation since September of 1943, find these fireballs the weirdest thing they have ever encountered. They are convinced that the Foo Fighters are designed to be some type of psychological military weapon, although the nature of the balls of fire is to not attack the planes."
Yeah. So were they encountered in places other than when they were flying over Germany?
Yes, that's
Okay.
where I'm going. When
Well, I mean, the first story, right? They were seeing them floating
right there,
30, 40 feet off the ground.
Oh, yeah.
and those were happening in the United States, in Sweden, in other countries, even in South America, prior to the war.
Okay.
During the war, because of the number of flights, of course, they were encountering these things more often, and the
Yeah.
news reports started picking up on them. So it would appear that most of them are occurring
Yeah.
in the theaters. But interestingly enough, as we'll see through this, there were actually more reports in the Pacific theater than there was in the European theater, which goes counter to the idea that there were Nazi superweapons, because
Yeah.
by that time Germany had already surrendered.
Right.
See, I could channel my deep inner scriptard and, say that, well, things like the Marfa lights and these other weird electrical phenomena that are like balls of light that float around. People will see them on the ground or near the ground occasionally. And then maybe when you're flying these planes in formation up in the sky over certain areas, there's weird electrical phenomena, and they seem to be
Like St. Elmo's fire. sort
like
of.
moving in unison with the planes, because the
Yeah.
planes have some kind of weird, they're made of metal and they're moving through this energetic area
Yeah.
or something.
That's
not a
covered.
bad-
in-
No, it's not a bad script.
no. Well, one very often, one comment very often heard from the pilots is that they felt that they were intelligently controlled because they maneuvered. They didn't just, although they did stick to the sides of the plane practically or within a set distance. Like this one, it says in Science News. Released on January 13th, 1945, opinions were leaning towards enemy weaponry. It was reported that although the mysterious Foo Fighters had scientists guessing about their nature or purpose, they generally agreed that the objects were not radio-controlled. They were convinced that there was no known possible way a ground-operated unit could control the objects in tight turns, maintaining close proximity to the aircraft. Physicists felt that the objects were able to conduct such close formations with the aircraft, there must be some kind of a magnetic force involved.
And if like the ones on the ground that weren't making any noise, if they're not displacing any air, then they wouldn't have any effect on the plane. Because if you're moving at 300 miles an hour and you get really close to another plane's wing, you're going to create air turbulence.
It says scientists continued trying to explain away the sighting accounts, insulting the pilots and with a multitude of absurd reasons, ignoring their observation skills, combat experience, and their intelligence. Foo Fighters were always illuminated, most of the time brilliantly. They could remain motionless in the sky. They could fly at speeds that were far surpassing 600 miles an hour. In almost 100% of the sightings, no flak or enemy night fighters were observed, including jet-propelled aircraft. According to most crews, the jets were distinctive and easy to recognize due to their flight characteristics. Most witnesses felt the Foo Fighters were pacing and observing their night fighters and were under intelligent control, but were not hostile. On January 19, 1945, General Arnold received his latest edition of the Commander's Intelligence Digest, which contained a section titled An Evaluation of German Capabilities. It included the heading of Radio and Radar, the German Air Force in 1945, flak, passive defenses, U-boats, and counterintelligence. But the most relevant to the story was other weapons, which included unexplained phenomena. The report went on to emphasize that the large number of silver spheres, alternately described as glass balls or balls of cotton wool, have been reported during the past year at various altitudes. As far as is known, no damage has yet been definitely ascribed to the presence of this phenomenon.
Silver spheres. Cotton wool.
This one's interesting. On January 18, 1945, the Western Air Command of the Royal Canadian Air Force reported a baffling sighting. According to Captain Parker, he was at Oyster River near Vancouver Island and the Campbell River when he spotted a large silver cylinder or balloon. It was flying around 15 to 20,000 feet. He watched as it floated past Mount Alexander. It appeared, this is a quote, it appeared to discharge another balloon or object, which dropped for about a minute and then enlarged itself. The first balloon and object continued south while the second balloon or object moved west out of the Butte Lake.
Enlarged itself. Like it swelled up?
On February 22nd, 1945, the 416th Night Fighter Squadron Mosquito crew was over central Po Valley. At 2,000 hours, the crew observed 3 lights at 10,000 feet in the shape of a triangle. Now in pursuit, the radar operator was unable to make contact on his screen. Nonetheless, the pilot continued on zeroing in for the kill. His Mosquito was about 2,000 feet when the light suddenly disappeared.
What year are we at now?
1945.
45. Okay.
Also in February of 1945 in New Mexico, Sergeant James L. Lease, who was stationed at Fort Sumner Air Force Base, and E.E. Dickey, were driving south on the Santa Rosa Highway. At around 3 in the afternoon, they saw a glint of a flying object coming across the mountaintop to their right. Lease commented that the object looked like a fast-flying P-38. According to Dickey, the object hung in the air near a small gas station about 12 feet off the ground. It remained motionless. Quote, the air seemed to vibrate with electricity, like one feels or hears walking under a high line. Dickey commented, quote, then it suddenly swept away like a dragonfly over water. No turning. It looked like an upside-down canoe shape, about 3 to 4 feet at its highest spot. No protrusions. It all happened so fast. The color was a weathered aluminum grayish. I tried to think what I had seen, possibly slight holes on the side, but it was too fast, out of sight in seconds. We knew we were seeing something that was not of our making.
Yeah. An upside-down canoe.
And that was in New Mexico.
You can't picture that.
That was so weird. New Mexico.
Let's see here. This was a rather long one. I'll skip this one. During the mid-morning hours of April 7th, 1945, a massive formation of B-17 flying fortresses was headed over the North Sea toward targets in Berlin. When Navy Captain Louis Soll, Soll's aircraft came under attack by a German fighter. The aircraft dove in and leveled off and then rolled into a diving position and placed itself under the B-17. Oddly, the aircraft did not attack, however. It was understandable since it was not a German fighter. It looked more like a V-2, but was executing skilled maneuvers without wings. Once Captain Sewell's aircraft observed the wingless aircraft, it came to a complete stop. At this time, Captain Sewell's B-17 was positioned over the object with the ocean below. The rest of the crew and many of the crewmen flying in the formation witnessed the spectacle. Suddenly, the unconventional object accelerated to about 2,000 miles per hour. It raced out of sight. Once Captain Sewell returned to the base, his B-17 crews reported the sighting to intelligence officers. At this time, Sewell's radar operator had taken several pictures of the object. The film was rushed away for developing. Captain Sewell heard nothing more about the strange object and said that this was standard operating procedure.
Of course.
So it came to a complete stop.
Yes.
But that's weird. That's a weird story because it says right when they observed it, it came to a complete stop, but it describes what it was doing before that. So that didn't make any sense.
And they said it looked like a V-2, but it was maneuvering, which V-2s just, they're ballistic. They don't maneuver.
Yeah.
A rocket. Like a rocket.
Right. Exactly.
And yeah, so it had no wings. And what did it say what altitude they were flying at when they saw that? Did it say?
No, it doesn't say.
Okay. Because 2,000 miles an hour is pretty fast.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't know how, you have to take their speed estimates with a grain of salt because you don't know. They
had a radar.
Well, on very few of these cases were the objects ever spotted on radar.
Oh, okay. So they were seeing it, but it wasn't showing up on their in-flight radar.
Which, suggests that the radar was going right through. It's transparent to radar.
Yeah. Or it was around it or something. Yeah. It was cloaked.
Yeah, because you can scatter it.
Yeah.
But they're not shaped like that.
But he took photographs, and the photographs were as soon as they landed, the film was taken and to develop or whatever. But they never heard about it again.
But I'm just trying to figure out. You could make something that's transparent to radar, I guess. If there was the right materials, it wouldn't bounce off of it. Yeah.
We'll get to that in the next segment.
Okay. Yeah, we're coming close to the end here, and I also have since we've moved past the Foo Fighters.
That's a stealth, the B-2, right? Stealth plane, but
yeah, but the V-2 was a rocket.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, he was asking B-2.
No, V2.
V2.
But still, my point is that this is a stealth plane, but it's stealth because it can fly super low, right?
No, it flies super high.
It flies high, but it's got the shaping has a lot to do with it, and then the materials,
Why does the shape-
coatings.
Yeah, it's the material and the stuff. It doesn't. It scatters the radar.
Scatters the radar
Yeah.
because of the shape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because of the material.
And the material.
Yeah.
Okay.
On April 26th, General Curtis LeMay's 21st Bomber Command Air Intelligence Staff produced a 5-page report representing the most up-to-date information and theories on the balls of fire. Under the report, quote, Japanese Air Defense Balls of Fire section, it stated, quote, in one form or another, as many as 302 sightings by 140 crews, which may have been classified under the heading of balls of fire, have been reported. While a large percent of these sightings could have continued for as much as 2 to 3 minutes, some have persisted for as much as 15 minutes. Another report from LeMay's staff dated May 10, 1945 stated the balls of fire were circular or spherical in shape. Then on May 12, 1945, the U.S. 7th Air Force Intelligence Staff issued a 5-page report which stated, quote, at the present time, no definite information has become available which would identify either the source or components of this unexplainable weapon.
Unexplainable weapon. All right, so
the Watcher's saying this, just going back to the radar stuff.
there's the V2 rocket.
Yeah, yeah. But he's saying that the B2
Yeah.
has a low surface area that is reflective to the radar wave pinging back to the dish.
Yeah.
And then it's helicopters that fly low enough for
Yeah, they can be below
radar.
radar. Because if you stay
they're
low
like
enough,
mixed in with the terrain. And
yeah.
There's
So
one last one because
Okay.
I know this segment's about done.
All right.
This one's
fine. Tell your story.
in mid-July 1949. 5 F-6 Hellcat pilots stationed at Naval Air Station Pasco, Washington, received an alert. They were briefed that radar had detected a fast-moving object, which was now sitting motionless over the Hartford Atomic Reactor Plant. Arriving in the area around noon, the pilots had no visual on the object until they climbed up to a much higher altitude. Then they saw the unidentified object. It was very bright and had a saucer appearance. The object, according to one pilot, was the size of 3 aircraft carriers side by side, oval-shaped and very streamlined like a stretched-out egg of a pinkish color. He further stated that some kind of vapor was being emitted around the object's edges from portholes or vents. The quote, the vapor was being discharged to form a cloud for disguise.
Oh,
unquote.
man.
They placed a radio call to the base for further instructions since they were already closing in to their peak performance altitude of 37,000 feet. Orders came back to pursue the object at the expense of the aircraft's engines. They pushed the Hellcats to 42,000 feet. But it didn't matter because the object was hovering at an estimated 65,000 feet.
Wow.
The object remained stationary for another 20 minutes in its fixed position. Then it went straight up and disappeared. There was nothing in 1949 that could fly at
Giant
that altitude.
pink eggs.
Right. The size of 3 aircraft carriers.
They sound like warm and fuzzies to me. Cotton candy, pink color,
Yeah.
wool. I don't know. They're hot balls of fire, just warm and fuzzies.
Man. All right, so before we take the break, I'll tell this. This is all the Foo Fighter talk. It's reminded me of this. Larry Niven wrote, one of my favorite science fiction authors. He wrote this, I guess they made it into a book eventually, but it was a series of short stories, and I think they were originally published in magazines or, like science fiction magazines as short stories.
Yeah.
And they were called Draco's Tavern, right? And the premise of all the short, there was a whole bunch of them, and the premise of the tavern was, it was this guy who, so after the war, after World War II, maybe it was in the 60s, I can't remember exactly when it was set, But it was after World War II, and this guy had started up a tavern because humanity had met aliens, basically. And the aliens showed up, and they traveled all over the galaxy, and they had these enormous ships, and they would show up with their huge ships, and all these people it was like cruise ships full of aliens. They'd all disembark to go do touristy stuff around the Earth, right? And he had a tavern, a huge tavern, like a bar in the spaceport where they would dock. And it was the only bar that had the ability to serve all these aliens, because they all had different requirements and
dietary requirements.
Yeah, and some of them came in, wearing bubbles full of weird liquids, and then they would ask for something to drink that would get them the equivalent of drunk, and he would have the chemicals to do it, right? So we had this really massively complicated bar. So but the point of the stories was that all these aliens are visiting, and it was always interactions between the Draco, the guy running the tavern, and these aliens in the bar. And there's one where this weird, I can't remember what it was described as, but it comes up and it's all, it wants a drink, and he brings it over, and it's sitting there just drinking this stuff all night. And eventually he goes over to talk to it, and he's like, what's the deal? Because it's by itself, and there's this huge party. And the thing like slams his drink down and is like, why are you not having a war, human? And he's like, what? And it's like, you're not having a war. And it says something about how it's going to die or whatever. Anyway, he eventually finds out that these aliens had shown up decades before while the humans were having this huge war. And it was highly entertaining to them, and they sent out all these cameras to follow all the freaking... Oh, man. And he was like, that was you? All the Foo Fighters were the cameras of the aliens watching us fight each other.
It was like entertainment.
Reality TV.
Yeah, and that's why they stayed right next to the plane. All the cameras, and when you were describing it, there's one next to the plane, and then there's a bunch out there. They're getting all the camera angles. And so the alien was mad at him for not having another war.
So he's just sitting at the bar bored.
No, he was mad because they took all the footage. It was like they were the equivalent of like a reality TV show that was a startup. They took all the footage, they went back to their world, and they made tons of money. They bought a whole bunch more stuff and came back here with a whole bunch more expensive equipment, and we didn't have another war. And now they're bankrupt.
The alien's like, season 4 sucks.
Right. He's like, why aren't you having a war? And the guy was like, well, I mean, all you aliens showed up, and we kind of stopped doing that. But anyway, it was a great Draco's Tavern. Great stories. So that's the explanation for Foo Fighters. They were camera drones.
Watcher said that 3 aircraft carriers was 6 city blocks.
Wow. Oh, man. Yeah, 0.61 miles. Wow. All right, let's take a break. This has been great so far.